This is my PSP 1000 Poké Ball Plus Joystick mod. This is a fairly simple mod where I've added the joystick from the Poké Ball Plus to the PSP 1000. In case you didn't know, the Poké Ball Plus is a controller for the Nintendo Switch that was an optional accessory for the Pokemon Let's Go games. Essentially it allows you to control the game using the little thumbstick on the top here, as well as incorporating motion controls. Anyway, so I was tidying out the cupboard the other day, stumbled across this, and I thought to myself, wow, that is a cute little thumbstick. And then I thought, I wonder if this could be modified into a PSP. So rather than take my partner's Poké Ball Plus apart, I had a little search online and I managed to find some replacement joystick modules for the Poké Ball Plus. So of course I grabbed a couple of these and set to work on seeing what I could do with them. So the first thing that I noticed, aside from the obvious difference in the size of the cap, is the fact that the Switch thumbstick and the Poké Ball Plus thumbstick are almost identical. So naturally I ripped them apart, had a look inside, and internally they are almost identical as well. There's maybe a couple of small differences, but generally it's pretty much the same stick. As you can see there, even the traces go to the same places, so what that means for me is that the pinout is the exact same, so I can literally just use the pinout from my previous Nintendo Switch joystick mod on this new Poké Ball Plus joystick mod. The only slight issue I was going to face doing this new mod is the fact that the Poké Ball Plus joystick has a graphite style ribbon cable, whereas I intentionally picked a gold style ribbon cable for the Nintendo Switch mod, as I could solder directly to these gold contacts. But on the other hand, you can't actually solder to these graphite contacts, so I was going to have to come up with something else. So I went online shopping and bought a whole bunch of FPC connectors and finally settled on one that I like. All an FPC connector is a tiny little flat ribbon cable connector with a bunch of little pins on the back, and you can solder your wires to there, solder them where they need to go. And it essentially just allows you to interface with a ribbon cable. One advantage of using an FPC connector rather than soldering the wires directly to the ribbon cable and to the motherboard is the fact that if the stick does go bad after a little while, you can simply just, unplug the stick and plug in a new one. And on that note, regarding the thumbstick going faulty, as this is basically just a Nintendo Switch thumbstick, I have no doubt that eventually it will get stick drift. I mean, even fresh out the pack, it does have a little bit of stick drift, although it's inside the dead zone, so it's not actually enough to cause any issues just yet. This isn't just an issue with the Poké Ball Plus joystick, this also affects, of course, the original Nintendo Switch Joy-Con joystick. As you know, they're not built very well, so naturally they drift pretty quick. Either way though, if the stick does start to drift eventually, this can be easily resolved, as I went over in my original video on the PSP 1000 Nintendo Switch joystick mod. So what you need to do is install the Macrofire plugin, get it enabled, go down to the analog stick sensitivity adjustment option. Once we go into there, we have a few different options we can select from. What you could do is either increase the dead zone radius, or you could even just change the coordinate of the actual dead zone itself, just to compensate for that drift. So yeah, there are a couple of things that you can do should you have drift with the Switch stick. So just like my original Nintendo Switch thumbstick mod, this also supports that fine granular control. So if I move the stick just a little bit, you can see it's starting to walk. If I move that over a little bit more, it's going to start to jog. And then if I move that all the way over, it's going to start to run. So it does support the full granular control like the original stick or the Joy-Con stick would. Moving on, the shell required some, but actually very little modification to house the Poké Ball Plus thumbstick. And in fact, it required less modification than the original Nintendo Switch thumbstick mod. I didn't even have to modify the hole where the thumbstick protrudes from, as the Poké Ball Plus thumbstick's cap just about fits through that hole. This of course makes for a much cleaner mod overall. I did have to use some silicone grease to get the cap through the hole without damaging the rubber, as the clearance is quite tight, which as you can see I learned is best to do judging from the torn rubber on my previous attempts where I used no grease at all. So unlike last time where I didn't bother hooking up the joystick's button, I've now hooked up the button, or L3, to the left trigger. So when I press this in, there we go, we can see that's doing something. So left trigger, left trigger. So one of the reasons I hooked it up to the left trigger is so that I could use it for the melee attack in Medal of Honor Heroes. And in GTA I can use it to recenter the camera. Of course though, like the original Nintendo Switch thumbstick mod, I could actually wire this up to any of the buttons of my choice. So in terms of how this new joystick feels, it's of course much better than the PSP's original thumbstick, as with the Poké Ball Plus thumbstick you get this nice rock-in motion, whereas with the original PSP's thumbstick you have that nasty sliding motion. Compared to the Joy-Con thumbstick, the Poké Ball Plus thumbstick is a lot smaller, as you can see here, which makes reaching down on the D-pad a lot easier, and of course due to the size it looks a lot cleaner and like it's meant to be there. Personally I think the original Joy-Con thumbstick is a little more comfortable to use than the Poké Ball Plus joystick, so I do think this will be better for longer sessions, however both are a pretty decent upgrade. That being said, you can install thumbstick caps on these, which makes the overall size noticeably bigger for a more comfortable feel. They come in all sorts of different shapes, colours and sizes too, so you have plenty of options. So the only real issue I can see using a thumbstick cap is that it does make the thumbstick sit a bit taller, which can make the D-pad a little bit more difficult to press, although it's not really that big of an issue. If I remove the thumbstick cap though, you'll see the difference in size there. So as you can see, it's just a little bit easier to press the D-pad without it. But again, it's not really that big of an issue at all. Regardless of me being a little bit pedantic about it, it does actually feel really good though, and it's awesome to have that level of customizability. Anyway, here's a little bit of gameplay to show it in action. So my final thoughts on this is that I really like this mod. I love the customizability of the different thumbsticks, and as you can see here, I've bought a bunch more bits and pieces so I can do a few more of these. So yeah, that's all. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed the video.